welcome guys to the Humanist Association of Ireland September meeting. My name is Tony and I'm part of the association's events team. At the beginning of each meeting, we always give a brief definition of humanism. Humanism is a simple philosophy. It's an ethical life stance which focuses on human values, being good without God. It's about taking responsibility and treating others with respect while living our one life. Now, if you'd like to know a more in-depth description, the Statement of Fundamental Principles of Modern Humanism, otherwise known as the Amsterdam Declaration, is available online. We are having a question and answer session after the presentation. If you'd like to take part, you can indicate that you would like to do so by clicking on the raise hand symbol. Now, we are recording this for YouTube as well, so if you're a bit shy and you can switch your camera off before the question and answer session, but do stay with us. Now, the freedom to openly identify as a humanist and express humanist values is something that most of us enjoy. Whether in conversation, in group meetings, or on social media, we can be honest about our views without threat or sanction. However, many of our fellow humanists cannot take this for granted. Indeed, it can cost them their freedom, sometimes even their lives. Our guest speaker this evening is Emma Wadsworth-Jones. Emma is Humanists International's first Humanist at Risk Coordinator. She's responsible for managing Humanists International's casework and campaigning activities on behalf of Humanists at Risk. Emma also previously campaigned and was a caseworker for PEN International across Africa, the Americas, Asia, and the Middle East. So I'm going to hand you over now to our guest, Emma. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It's really nice to see your faces and to be able to join you and talk a bit about my work. Tony, would you be able to enable shared screen and then I can put up some slides?
Yes. Okay. So
it's not necessary. I can just talk at you, but I figure it might be nicer to see some slides rather than just my face. So while we work that out, though.
Okay. Do you have the option there now?
Yes, there now. Thank you. So can you see my screen, ladies and gentlemen?
Yes, can indeed.
Fabulous. So I am the Casework and Campaigns Manager, otherwise known as the Humanists at Risk Coordinator for Humanists International. My role actually was created at the beginning of last year. I joined the organization in April. So I joined mid-pandemic, and as such, I have titled this presentation Supporting Humanists at Risk During a Pandemic, because that's exactly what I've been doing. As Tony mentioned, I've come with more than 7 years experience working on the rights of individuals who are persecuted for the written word and doing casework on their behalf. And so I've translated that experience to Humanists International. Humanists International created the role because we were receiving an increasing number of requests for assistance from individuals across the globe, and there was a commitment from the membership and from the board that they wanted to do that work in a more systematic way. So my role has been very much about creating those systems and developing our response to the crises that befall individuals at risk. So not only do I work as the Humanists at Risk Coordinator, as I'm known, but I also run our Freedom of Thought report and ensure that that's edited and published on time. And I run our End Blasphemy Laws campaign. I'll talk about all of this a bit as we go along, because for me, it's all part of the same thing. Firstly, what I'll do is I'll talk to you a little bit about patterns of persecution that we see for the non-religious and the kinds of requests that we receive as a result. I'll follow that up with who those people are, rather than just the bare numbers. Who are they? What kind of people are they? How do we actually support them? What help have we provided in the last 15 months that I've been around? And then at the end, there'll be time for any questions that you might have. If I go too fast, or if there's anything that you don't feel was very clear, please do feel free to let me know, and I'm very happy to elaborate. If I can't answer here and now today, I'm very happy to continue the conversation later. But I think there should only be a few things that I won't be able to tell you immediately. So let's start with patterns of persecution. So we know from our own experience working with individuals at risk, as well as from our research, that non-religious individuals across the globe face a range of different issues as a result of their belief. They often face social isolation, discrimination, bullying. This can be within the home, within the family unit. Bullying, abuse, risk of attack even from family members when they discover that they are non-religious. But it can also be society at large. So that's why it's quite tricky and often quite different from other forms of persecution that we see globally with other forms of human rights defenders. Individuals who are openly non-religious may even face discrimination in terms of gaining employment or struggle holding on to their jobs. Or they may even just lack legal recognition, mere recognition of their existence. They can't hold positions of power, they can't stand for election because they are non-religious and therefore they don't really exist. We also see, and I think one of the biggest things that we see is a fear of blasphemy laws being used against them, or accusations of blasphemy, even if it's not necessarily that they're going to be charged with a crime. This is because the punishments for blasphemy and the perceived gravity of the crime of blasphemy is so great that they fear that they might be attacked by vigilantes. They might face a heavy prison sentence. In some cases, they could face execution. So they fear these accusations from their family members, from the wider world, from being exposed. And they fear attack as a result of these accusations. There's a big issue of impunity for violence across the globe, whether it's for the non-religious, the religious who are being targeted, human rights defenders. Governments often fail to hold people to account for crimes that are perpetrated. And what that does is create a cycle of impunity where would-be assailants are emboldened to carry out further acts of violence because there are no consequences. And we see this a lot with individuals who are non-religious who are attacked. States often fail to hold anyone to account for their crimes. You can look at various different cases of murders of Indian rationalists, for example, and that creates this climate of fear and this feeling of the need to stifle oneself and one's self-expression, which has a really damaging effect on people's well-being that I don't think can be overestimated. So in terms of the request for assistance, this map shows you the requests that we've received since May of last year, since May 2020, with 51 being the highest number, and perhaps unsurprisingly, that number comes from Pakistan. We receive consistently high number of requests from individuals from Pakistan, and I think there's no coincidence there. I think that is partly because of the severity of blasphemy laws in the country and the fear that creates. Not everyone there has been charged with blasphemy, as I said before, but it's enough to fear it. Many people are seeking to flee. We've also had, as a result of the resurgence of the Taliban, an increasing number of cases from Afghanistan. Afghanistan is now swiftly catching up with Pakistan, and I expect it to continue that way over the coming weeks. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the Middle East and North Africa, we receive a lot of requests, particularly Morocco, Yemen, Egypt, Algeria as well. I nearly spoke in Spanish then, I'm not entirely sure why. And you can see there as well, Nigeria is actually quite high. And the reason that Nigeria is quite high, I think is not necessarily because the non-religious tend to be more persecuted in Nigeria, but I think it's partly because, as you will know, our colleague Mubarak Bala was arrested in April of last year and held without charge for over a year. He's only just very recently been charged in a court, contrary to all of his rights. A big campaign developed in response to his situation, and many individuals in Nigeria, non-religious individuals, took up the cause and have been campaigning on the ground. And as a result, they have been targeted. There's also been a very tense climate in the country because of Mubarak's arrest. And so that's meant that individuals have felt more at risk and have reached out to us. And because we are the public face of the campaign, spearheading the campaign for Mubarak Bala, I think that people know more about us now. And so they reach out to us more. And so I think this is an example of a chain reaction where someone reaches out to us for help, we offer them support, and so they tell someone else that we're someone they can reach out to. In terms of who they are, you can see the top graph, and this is probably the one that I'll focus on more because I think it's perhaps more interesting. You can see quite clearly that 82% of those who reach out to us are men, and only about 18% are women. Within that, the kinds of persecution that they report is different. So men, they tend to face persecution much more outside of the home. They tend to fear being accused of blasphemy. They tend to struggle in employment, whereas women tend to report being forced into marriages, being forced to wear the hijab, being victims of domestic violence, or familial pressure to conform in other ways. We might assume that men, as they are more vocal, more outspoken, are more targeted. And therefore it makes sense that this is the case, and that actually women are, non-religious women are less vulnerable. However, I suspect that that's not the case. I suspect that what's going on here, the reason for this gender disparity is actually, in fact, that the worst countries for atheists and humanists tend to also be the worst countries for women, so that they're facing a double discrimination. On the one hand, it's harmful religious practices, and on the other, you've got a systemic patriarchal oppression. So they're facing more barriers to even reach out to us, or to even know that we exist, in fact. Many of the people who reach out to us and who identify as female often have less access to outside support. They often have limited access to a mobile telephone or to a laptop, for example. It might be supervised. So they aren't actually always safe to reach out to us. They might be relying on a friendly family member, a sibling, who is willing to turn a blind eye and help them. But they may not have the independence that they really need to be able to reach out to us with ease, whereas men tend to be more able to do that from the offset. I'll go back once more actually to this slide where, in fact, it says Hindu twice, but actually the 0.4% should actually say non-religious. I apologize for that. I think that the 73% Muslim probably is explained by blasphemy laws, but I want to just touch on the 20% that's unknown. The reason that is listed as unknown is because that when people reach out to us, they don't always tell me what their religious background is. And I'm not going to make an assumption. They could be from a different religious minority than the majority in that country. So I always wait until they inform me. So until they inform me, it stays as unknown, but those figures are always changing. But I feel like not including unknown in this pie chart would actually skew the statistics and make it much more misleading. So since May of last year, we have received almost 300 requests for assistance. In fact, we might have actually hit 300 by now. I did these slides yesterday and the numbers are constantly changing. So it could very well be 300 at this point. As you can see, we've seen a sharp increase in the number of requests for assistance. In August, we received 38 requests, and this is largely down to the resurgence of the Taliban in Afghanistan. The majority of those who reach out to us are seeking help with relocation and/or an asylum claim. Many of them want to know how to go about claiming asylum. And so they need advice, or they might need legal assistance. It might also be legal assistance for charges they're facing, or oftentimes it's the fact that their asylum case has been rejected, so they need assistance from a lawyer, and we might be able to help put them in touch with one or help fund one, for example. Unfortunately, relocation and asylum are two of the most time-consuming, but also the most difficult pieces of work to do, especially during a pandemic. Relocation has been nigh on impossible for the last 15 months. And so it's been a case of actually trying to ensure people's safety where they are as much as possible. So we haven't always been able to meet their own requests, but we've tried to help them in other ways where we can. Looking at the impact of COVID-19, firstly, we've seen many states, many religious groups blaming the COVID-19 pandemic and the spread of the pandemic as a punishment from God for sin, with the ultimate sin being you not being religious. And as a result, we've seen scapegoating in some countries, we've seen harsher discrimination in others. I've had individuals report to me that people have been spitting on them in the street, they think in an attempt to give them COVID as a non-religious person. Those are the kinds of experiences that people are seeing. But what we've also seen is that individuals who need to relocate, even if it's not abroad, even if it's just in the short term or the long term within their own country, haven't been able to because of lockdown restrictions. So they've been stuck in an environment where they aren't particularly safe, often where they've had to simulate being religious, pretend to be religious in order to ensure their own safety, despite the damage that that's doing for their well-being. So I've had lots of people reaching out to me who have been struggling with their mental health and often been quite suicidal as a result, forced to observe religious festivals, forced to pray in order to ensure that they are safe. With those who are activists and who are more publicly known, although they felt more at risk when lockdown began, they were actually probably a bit safer where it's been an external threat, because whilst they were locked down at home and they might have felt exposed, there would be assailants were also locked down at home. Whereas now, as things start to ease, this is where it's becoming a bit more dangerous for them, particularly because they are still in hiding, feeling trapped and vulnerable, but those who would like to attack them are more able to move freely. So this is quite a vulnerable time for quite a lot of people. We've also seen that obviously embassies have been closed for a very long time. So a lot of the normal vehicles that we would have used to try and get people out of the country, perhaps through humanitarian visas if possible, or on a short-term relocation program, there are quite a few of them across the globe that are really, really valuable. Short-term relocation is actually great. Often people don't need to relocate permanently. They only need to go for a short period of time until things calm down. And then perhaps they need to relocate internally to somewhere they're less known, but at least that way you're not contributing to a brain drain where people are just having to leave, and those with a sort of humanist mindset are not staying in the country where they are so needed. And finally, I just wanted to comment on those who were in prison when COVID struck. We have a number of cases of those who've been promoting humanist values, not all of them non-religious, I would say, but many of them non-religious, who were in prison when COVID struck. And the conditions in which they are being held and have been held prior to COVID are conducive to the wider spread of the disease and make them much more susceptible. They're held in very cramped conditions. They're often held with complete disregard to their own well-being, often not given access to medical care when they need it. Many of them are therefore suffering from other conditions as a result, making them more vulnerable. So we've been monitoring their cases as closely as possible, along with a number of other human rights activists. So it's really important that we remember that behind these statistics that I've just told you about are human beings. They're individuals like Leo Igwe, a member of our board, in fact, a Nigerian humanist who campaigns against witchcraft-related abuses. They're Mubarak Bala, the president of the Nigerian Humanist Association, who's been now detained for 15 months. Asad Noor, a Bangladeshi blogger. George Gavriel, a Cypriot artist who's currently facing accusations of blasphemy. Ashraf Fayyad, who's a poet in Saudi Arabia, and many more. They are people they have families, they have lives, they have dreams, and they are being targeted. These are the people that I can talk to you about publicly. There are many, many more that I can't talk to you about publicly, and I will never be able to talk to you about publicly because it's not in their interest for me to do so. However, should you ever be interested, you can go onto our website and look up our cases of concern. And the cases where we are working publicly, you can find them there with a full briefing on what is going on in their case at the moment, and also what our calls are. What are we trying to achieve now? How can you get involved? And these are just some of those cases. So I talk about casework. Casework is in my job title, but what do we mean by it? Essentially, it's the support that we provide to individuals. And because I take that broad definition, it's actually a very common thread throughout all of our work, even if it's not specifically me that's doing the work. But it might not be the exclusive focus of any area of work. So for example, our membership. Here you can see a map of our members across the globe, up to date, I think, as of our General Assembly just last month. We have more than 100 members in over 60 countries across the globe. Many of them, especially in Western countries, receive requests for assistance. Where they can, they assist them themselves, but often it means that they refer those cases to me. I'll give you an example. Humanists UK, for example, provide help to humanists at risk who are already in the UK. So, for example, there is a Pakistani humanist who is in the country and is claiming asylum. Humanists UK and the wonderful team there work to support their asylum claim, work to assess their case, and then write letters of support for them if they can verify their cases. But if someone reaches out to them from outside of the country, it's not really within their capacity to help. So they send that case to me. So in addition to the requests that I receive from individuals on a near daily basis, I also receive referrals from our membership, some of whom those individuals are actually known to them, but many of them are sort of almost random requests that have reached them and that they aren't able to deal with. We have other members like Free Thought Lebanon, for example, that's running a fantastic program right now to support humanists at risk in the country there. They run a hotline, they provide advice, they befriend individuals who are being, who have fled persecution, for example, help them find their way in Lebanon, help them access lawyers or psychological support, for example. I don't think we can underestimate the importance of solidarity. It's so important for individuals who have been so isolated to find their community again. And we are their community, whether it's online in meetings like this or on Facebook groups or in person. We are their community. And so bringing these people into the fold is really a very valuable thing to do. So I encourage you as an organization to consider how you might be able to support individuals who reach out to you for support. Obviously within your capacity though, because this work takes a lot of time and resources and mental energy too. So you have to make sure that you're prepared for it. We have other members who provide linguistic expertise and they help me in verifying cases. Often individuals will send me evidence of their persecution. It might be a police report or a medical report or perhaps screenshots of threats on Facebook. Often they're in a language that I don't speak. I only speak two, and very few Spanish people seem to be persecuted for their humanism, so it's not so useful. However, someone who speaks Farsi, someone who speaks Arabic, someone who speaks Turkish, there are so many languages that are so valuable, and we have wonderful members across the globe who lend their expertise to me to help me in verifying cases. Other members provide training to government officials on the right to freedom of religion or belief, and specifically the non-religious, to sensitize them to the persecution that the non-religious face, in order that when someone does make an asylum claim, it's actually assessed with that in mind and with an understanding of what the persecution of the non-religious means. We also provide grants to our members, especially in the Global South, to run projects of their own to promote humanism. In the future, I would love to provide more training and more resources to our members, both those who are being persecuted in the form of training in security, both physical, digital, and psychosocial, so that we can preempt this need to flee and instead help people to secure themselves so that they can stay where they are and where they're needed. But also to help our members in countries where we're receiving individuals who are fleeing persecution, to help them to support those individuals and to feel like they have the capacity and the knowledge to be able to support them well. But all of that takes resources, both financial and human, and that will be some way down the line, I imagine, but it is something that I'd like to work towards. I'd also love to have meetings with our members to share knowledge and experience. So many of our members have experience in this work and what it means to do the work on the ground. And I really would love for us to be able to learn from each other rather than just have me talk at a Zoom room. It's also part of our advocacy. Here you can see the wonderful Qasem delivering a statement at the UN. We use our cases to inform our advocacy and to humanize issues that might otherwise seem quite dry, and people might wonder why they should really care. It also means that we are taking their cases to an international stage, and in doing so, we afford them a little bit more protection. We only do this with their consent and only where it's safe to do so. There are some cases where it will never be safe for us to be publicly associated with them, and it would be irresponsible of us to take their case to an international stage like this. But where it is appropriate, we do. And even in some circumstances, we can bring them to speak for themselves rather than us speaking on their behalf. We also conduct training for government officials, members of European Parliament, on the right to freedom of religion or belief, and specifically how non-belief fits into that. And as a result, we've published the Good Practice Guide on FORB. I really recommend you have a look at it. It's on our website. It's a really useful resource. It's I found it incredibly useful just for my own work. It's produced by my colleague Elizabeth, who you can see down the bottom there, and Lily Ashworth as well. It's also a part of our campaigns. Here you can see the map of the End Blasphemy Laws campaign, which, as I'm sure you know, we launched in 2015. This map shows you where blasphemy laws are on the books or have been on the books from 2015 onwards. Green meaning where it's been repealed since 2015. There are actually a couple of countries missing from this list that I'm going to add, I'm working on, but they're just not quite there yet. I think that this is very important because, as I've already mentioned, blasphemy is one of the main motivators, or fear of blasphemy is one of the main motivators for people to flee or to stifle their own expression. So campaigning against blasphemy legislation is vital. And on our website, the End Blasphemy Laws website, we have documented the actual provisions that exist, what the penalties are, and we can publicize cases. Such as George Gabriel, for example, the Cypriot I mentioned earlier. So it's a really important resource and part of our campaigning. And finally, there's also our research. So you will, of course, know the Freedom of Thought report, which examines each country's record of upholding the rights of the non-religious, mainly looking at the legal framework, but also looking at persecution as well. And then on the right here, you can see the Humanists at Risk Action Report, which is a sort of a sub-report, I would say, published for the first time in June 2020. It looked at 8 countries and used survey data to understand what the lived experience of people on the ground is. Because you can have an understanding of the legal structures in place that are outlined in the Freedom of Thought report, but actually sometimes the lived experience is different. So we were lucky enough to have a small grant in order to look at 8 countries. And so using the Freedom of Thought report combined with individual testimony and case studies, we were able to look more in depth at 8 countries. Specifically, it was Colombia, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Pakistan, Nigeria, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka. There we go, I can remember. We could really go in depth on what their experience is. We use our research for everything we do. It informs our advocacy, but it also informs casework. I use our research, I use the Freedom of Thought report on a daily basis to help me prioritize the cases that I'm supporting, to help me understand where they are coming from, what the situation is on the ground for them. It also is used by other actors, by governments, for example, in assessing asylum claims and an individual's claim to persecution. It's used as a reference tool by other organizations as well, such as Secular Rescue, to support applications and to assess applications too. So our research is vital, and our casework informs our research also. It helps to enrich the Freedom of Thought report too, and to make sure that we're cross-checking, fact-checking what our understanding is. And then there's the direct support, which I think is probably what's most commonly understood when you say the term casework. So this is mainly my work. I'm the main person who does this in the office. It could be individual campaigns. These are often public campaigns, like the campaign we've been running for Mubarak Bala. It could be private, it could be behind the scenes lobbying and moving through our members perhaps to reach out to the right people. It might be emergency grants. A lot of the work that we do is signposting, providing advice, directing people to others who might be able to support them. Often there are other organizations where we have an overlapping mandate with that individual. So for example, there's a journalist who is non-religious, who is being persecuted both as a result of their non-religious beliefs and what they've been writing about and their journalism. There are lots of organizations that support journalists that have had a far greater amount of resources than we do. And so we can refer them on to those organizations to support, so that then we're getting the people who really don't fall in anyone else's mandate, and we can support them best. Networking, solidarity, putting people in touch with our members on the ground. For example, just the other day, I put a Bangladeshi gentleman in touch with colleagues in Norway, for example. Because he's just arrived and he doesn't know anyone and he wants to know people. Or I had an Afghan case reach out to me saying, do you know anyone in Turkey that you can put me in touch with when I get there, because I don't know what I'm doing? These are things that we can do, and these are things that our members can do. It's also asylum support and relocation. Those two are the most resource intensive from my time in terms of verification and then the work that goes into supporting those efforts, but they can be very valuable. In terms of emergency grants, we provide up to £1,500 per person in any 12-month period to support a range of needs. We don't need to give the full grant. We always ask the individual to provide us with a budget that we review, but it can be the full amount, or it could be that they come back to us a bit later and say, would you mind sending us a bit more money? That's also possible too. Whatever works best for them at that moment is in time. So most often in the last 15 months, it has been to cover shelter and food and bills, because people haven't been able to flee. So they've been stuck in hiding. They perhaps haven't been able to go to work, and they just need help with making those expenses, meeting those expenses. So that's what we've been able to do. I imagine as time goes on, as things open up, more of this emergency grant might be used for relocation, might be used for the costs of train fares, flights, visas, etc. But right now, most of it is on shelter. Some of it is on medical treatment, and then there's some more on legal expenses. We can also provide publicity. So this is a letter that the wonderful Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka wrote to Mubarak Bala to mark 100 days of detention. Unfortunately, these words are as important now as they were then, but they serve as a reminder to us all that we will continue to work on his behalf. And we're very grateful to Wole for writing this letter, because it afforded a great deal of attention on Mubarak's case at a very sensitive time when the world needed to be looking. So being able to harness these kinds of actions too, and to draw attention to a case when it's appropriate is really valuable and really important. So, what's our approach? Typically, we receive a request for help. This is normally from the individual themselves, but it might sometimes be from someone else. Typically, when they've been arrested or detained, it will come from elsewhere. The request might be quite detailed, but it also often is quite vague. People are afraid when they initially reach out, or they're in a hurry. So they give the bare minimum amount of information, and hence often their religious background is unknown when I log it, for example. I send them an initial questionnaire, which is used to get a sense of exactly what the situation is for them, who they are, where they're from, where they are, what persecution they face, why do they think they face it, and what evidence do they have to support it, which then gives me an insight into what kind of support we might be able to provide to them. Because what they might be asking for might not be within our capacity, but I might be able to assess how we might be able to help them otherwise. So this is probably the first step, is probably the bit that takes the longest. It's the time taken to really work in detail to establish facts, clarify all the details, ask all of those annoying questions of follow-up that I ask people, and to assess their needs. It's frustrating for me that it's slow, but I know that it's also frustrating for our members, and it's frustrating for the individuals themselves. But it's important that we do it right, and we're doing the right thing for the right reasons at the right time in the right way. So this first step is absolutely crucial for everything that we do. Once I've done that, once we've got that information, managed to assess their case, we then work with the individual to decide on an action plan for them. Where it's public, we get their consent. We work on a principle of informed consent, which means that the individual has control of what we do. It's really important that individuals whose agency has been stripped from them for so long are in control. They have a plan for their own advocacy, especially when it's around illegal charges, for example. I'm not qualified to make decisions on their behalf. They are, or their lawyer is. And in fact, actually, when it's a legal case, I'll be working with their lawyer quite closely to make sure that my messaging supports their own messaging and their own legal strategy. We then provide the assistance that we've agreed upon. That might mean that we coordinate with our members, for example. We might reach out to members and say, could you help with this? Or if it's a big campaign, we send an action out to all of our members and ask people to write letters to the authorities, to publish information, to hold events, for example, to send briefings or meet with their local foreign ministry in order to raise a case of concern. We then continue to have ongoing communication, both public and confidential. Not everything that I share in our briefings is everything that's going on. So, for example, with the case of Mubarak Bala, that briefing is comprehensive in what I can say publicly. But there is a lot of information that is not included there because I can't say it publicly because it's not in the interests of Mubarak to do so. But where we can share information, we do. And often our members and the contribution that our members make is vital because they have lots of connections within their own government, their own country, that can then inform us and help us and reach out and give us information that we might not know. But we can also alert the authorities to say, oh, by the way, we've just heard they might be presented in court tomorrow. And lo and behold, an embassy official might turn up at court, for example. So ongoing communication is essential. It also means that we can make sure that what we're doing is having the right effect. And if not, then we can change tack. We're always wanting to make sure that we're doing the right thing, as I said before. So as the situation changes, as there are new developments in the case, we again work to establish the facts, clarify anything, and assess what we're doing. Is it the right thing? Get consent, provide support, and the wheel goes round and round. That is essentially what I do. So how have we helped in the last 15 months? Well, this is I apologize, slightly out of date since the last 2 weeks. But nonetheless, I think it's much more representative of the work that I've done over the last 15 months than the last 2 weeks might suggest, which is that although 35% of people might be seeking assistance with relocation, actually only 3% get any assistance with relocation. And those were people largely who we were assisting before lockdown hit and who got stuck. Although there have been some others in addition, but largely that's what that's been. Most of the support that we've provided has been of advice or referrals. So sending people to others who might be better placed to help, for example, or advising them on how one goes about claiming asylum, but not necessarily supporting their claims because they haven't made them yet. There's been also 17% of our time has been spent on campaigning and advocacy for individuals. So many of the photographs that I showed you earlier of people we've been working on behalf of, those are in that 17% of the workload. Mubarak Bala has been a large proportion of that. There have been emergency grants that I'll talk a little bit more about soon too, and then asylum claims, supporting asylum claims. Writing letters of support, intervening when the authorities would, in my opinion, seem to be making a mistake in their assessment of a case. So in the last 15 months, we've dispersed, I suppose, more than £25,000 in emergency grants to 22 individuals. As I said, most of that has gone on just general living costs. 10% has gone on relocation because relocation is expensive, even though it's been on very few people. It is costly. Legal fees, often in support of asylum claims and asylum appeals, that's where that money has gone, and medical costs. We have supported 15 applications for asylum or resettlement from individuals from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Egypt, Morocco, Pakistan, Somalia, and Tunisia. Of these, 5 individuals are now safe. 2 are awaiting the decision of the authorities and face the possibility of imminent deportation. And 8 are stuck in potentially life-threatening situations, and we continue to monitor their cases very closely. We've raised public awareness about cases of concern. Again, Mubarak Bala, he's been a theme of this presentation, and that's because he was arrested the day after I joined the organization. So actually his working on his case has been one of the main focuses of my career with the Humanists. There have been positive outcomes. So here you can see Gulalai. I'm sure you recognize Gulalai. She is a humanist and human rights activist from Pakistan, a former board member of Humanists International, who was arrested on the way back from a board meeting that we held in London. Essentially she was detained in connection with her promotion of women's rights and empowerment of girls in Pakistan. We heard about her case as soon as she was detained, and we were able to respond immediately, spreading information, helping our members to respond to the situation and to ensure that she was safe. And almost a year after her arrest, she was able to announce that she had arrived safely in the United States, where she is now claiming asylum. In the middle here, we have writer, blogger, and human rights defender Sheikh Mohammed Maketa, who is from Mauritania, who in 2014 was sentenced to death for apostasy after he wrote an article on his blog that examined links between certain interpretations of Islam prevalent in Mauritania and modern day slavery. He served 2.5 years, I believe, was arbitrarily detained for another 3.5. He struggled to get a lawyer. Understandably, people were afraid to represent him because they feared that they were going to be accused of similar crimes, of being an apostate for supporting an alleged apostate. We worked behind the scenes on his case to lobby the Mauritanian government to release him and to commute his sentence. It was successfully appealed eventually to 2 years. We also campaigned publicly on his case, raising his case at the United Nations, at the Human Rights Council in Geneva, for example. And then there's Somali professor Mahmoud Jama Ahmed, who was sentenced to several years in prison. I think it was 2.5, for blasphemy in connection with a Facebook post. He was eventually pardoned after about 10 months in jail. However, prominent imams were still calling for him to be killed and sentenced to death, as he was a blasphemer. And so he had to flee. He fled just as lockdown was announced. And so he got stuck in a neighboring country where he still wasn't yet safe, but he was slightly safer, but he couldn't go any further. So he and his wife and 3 children were stuck and in hiding. So we spent a long time working with him to support his own initiatives for his relocation and to financially support him and his family while they were in hiding. They have now fled. They've successfully fled abroad, and they are in a safe location at last, where they will be claiming asylum, and we will be supporting them in their asylum claim. It's really important to remember that change takes time, but we are seeing results. We're seeing activists being acquitted of religious insult charges. We're seeing the Scottish government repealing blasphemy laws. We've seen the Norwegian authorities amend its guidance on the assessment of non-religious individuals for asylum, so that it's equated with religious individuals, in fact, as it should be in the right to freedom of religion or belief. And for example, not that long ago, Pakistani atheist Mohammad was granted asylum in Greece following an appeal, which we supported, helping him to pay for his legal fees. So change happens, but it happens slowly. But it does happen. And I really want to finish with that, because I think that often we can feel disheartened by what's going on in the world and by what seems to be a wave after wave after wave of negativity and negative downward turns. But actually things are changing in a positive direction too. But it's not instantaneous, and we have to keep working. And supporting these individuals will help in seeing that change in the long term. So before I move on to your questions, I have one question for you, which is, are you with us? We support individuals at risk, but obviously it has a cost. So each year we have a fundraising campaign, Protect Humanists at Risk. You can find it on Just Giving, and if you would like to, any donation, great or small, would be greatly, greatly appreciated. So over to you and your questions.
That's great, Emma. Thank you. And genuinely hugely informative. Really, really was. So it was very, very comprehensive as well. And just the story there of Mahmoud and the positive outcome. I think the successes are as important, you know, really, really to highlight. It was fantastic. Very, very uplifting. Thank you very much for that. Okay, do we have any questions for Emma? Please feel free to stick up your hands. And we have do we have anybody there? Do we have, Emma, sorry, just while we're waiting to see if anyone would like any questions, can I ask, you mentioned Afghanistan there, and of course, it turned to holy hell there, as we all know, a few weeks ago. And I'm just wondering now that as the eyes of the world turns away and the media focus turns away from Afghanistan, have you noticed a marked uptrend in people that have been contacting you for assistance?
Well, I mean, I've noticed an uptrend prior to the Taliban taking Kabul.
Okay.
We'd seen an increase in attacks on human rights defenders, on writers, poets. Several individuals who I have worked with in my previous role were murdered prior to the Taliban taking Kabul. So I was aware that things were likely to get worse. I think we all expected it. And we've had an increasing number of requests over the last year for assistance from Afghanistan, but I think in the last 2 weeks, I've had at least 28 requests for assistance from individuals from Afghanistan. And that's in addition to the normal flow of requests that I receive, which is probably about 16 in a month. Mm-hmm. So I think that will continue to go up, because as we see people turning away and not focusing as much anymore, that's when you'll see the Taliban starting to become more repressive. Yeah. And we're already seeing that now a little bit, actually. We've just seen that women are no longer going to be allowed to play sport, for example. We've seen that they've put in place an all-male cabinet, several members of whom are wanted by the FBI. And in addition to that, they're bringing back the ministry on Vice, or whatever it's called. My brain is gone at the moment, I apologize. That's notorious for implementing a really hardline version of Sharia law. So we can only really expect it to get worse. And from my standpoint, I'm preparing to have a sustained level of requests coming in at this level for quite some time.
And will there be extra resources allocated to your work as well as it increases, or?
I would hope so, but that's somewhat dependent on us having more resources to allocate. Our budget is fixed from the beginning of the year, so it's a bit difficult unless we are able to raise more money for those resources to go to this work. But certainly I hope so. And we're meeting on Friday to discuss further how we address the situation.
Okay, so we have a question from Gillian.
Yeah, hi Emma. I suppose I just want to acknowledge as CEO of the HAI that we on occasion here in Ireland, we get some queries or requests for help from people who are at risk in different parts of the world. And Emma is our go-to person. So Kilda and myself some time back had a meeting with Emma, and that's the arrangement we have, because we know that Emma would normally have received something similar or would be in the process of validating whether the requests are genuine or not. So it's not just something that happens elsewhere. So we are seeing some of these requests, and we have that, this was connection there with Emma, just so that there's one coordinated response instead of us doing something and then Humanists International doing something else. So we're linked up in that way. So it's really, I suppose, just to acknowledge that, Emma, and say thank you and for being there as a support whenever we get those requests. So thank you.
It's my pleasure. That's what I'm here for. And thank you for sending them on also and for paying attention.
Okay. Sure.
Okay, we also have a question from Sarah. You good to go there?
It's kind of linked with the last question and answer, really. But how do people know where you are? You know, I mean, if somebody puts up a post on Facebook, how do they know that this storm is going to come on to them and they're going to be in all sorts of danger? And how do they find you?
Well, it varies. So lots of people will face reprisals from Facebook, literally on Facebook. They will get threats on Facebook. People will start to investigate who they are. If you're not using a pseudonym, that's often where people are particularly at risk, because then they start to research, they start to work out where you're from, and they speak to people in your local community, find out where you live. Then you start receiving telephone calls or letters that are threatening, for example. It can escalate that way. Sometimes they're public figures, they're public activists. Many humanists are activists, so that's quite common. If it's just in the home, then it might just be that they've never even dared to say what they believe. How they hear about me tends to be Googling, looking for people who can support them. It might be that they're referred on by members when they receive a request, and usually that's also Googling. What you often find when people are quite desperate for help is that they sort of send the same email out to lots of different organizations, hoping someone will respond. And so often many of our members get the same message that they forward on to me. And I'll also probably have already received it. But if I haven't, that's fine too. I'm happy to address it. But often that's what people do. They send out these sort of blanket emails to any organization that they can find. Sometimes there can be a misunderstanding of the word humanist. It's often taken to be humanitarian. In many countries, it doesn't translate. It just translates to humanitarian. So you get individuals reaching out to you because they've been looking for humanitarian support in terms of relocation or food or etc. Our fundraising campaign, interestingly, has also been something that has informed people of our existence as that's been spread. It's particularly on social media where our members are sharing it, others are sharing it, then they see, oh, this is what these people do, and they know to reach out. Word of mouth is another one, less common, but specifically in Nigeria, quite common. But it varies a lot. It might also be other international organizations that I work with who feel like that person fits better in my remit than in theirs. And so they'll reach out that way too.
Thanks.
That's great. Thanks for that, Emma. Okay, before we wrap things up, does anybody have any further questions? Very good. Emma, I think it's testament to how much you covered in your presentation that we only had a couple of questions at the end. It was incredible. Thank you so much. Anyway, thanks for joining us, Emma. And I do have to say the passion and the drive you bring to the role is incredible. And I'd just like to wish you the very best of luck with your work.
Thank you very much.
In the future as well.